Hi, and welcome to the module on individual change. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about individual motivation, the way people react to it, different styles and personalities that we need to think about. Hope you enjoy it. My name is Rod Sowden, the Managing Director of Aspire Europe, lead author of Managing Successful Programs and P3M3. Hope you find the content interesting. Well, all individuals are different. We come from different backgrounds with different baggage, and that dictates how we respond to change. So things to consider. What are the consequences of change to us? The old saying, what's in it for me or winning me? Yeah, we will respond very differently to change when we consider the consequences. I don't think in my career I've ever come up against anybody who gets very upset when you offer them a pay rise for doing less work. So consequences of change will dictate how the people react. Thinking about the organisation's history for dealing with change. Now, if an organisation has an integrity and has gone through a number of reorganisations, restructured and treated people fairly, then people are going to be more trusting in the way the change is delivered. Whereas if an organisation has acted without integrity, misled staff or pulled stunts on people that left staff demotivated, then you would be more worried about how this change is going to affect you when you come across it. Things like type of individual you are, how you react to the change, how your emotions are structured. Are you very logical, take it in your stride, or do you get very kind of hyperactive and stressed about things when you can't see where you're going? So the type of individual you are, and also considering your own individual history. So you could have been through major changes that have actually gone well for you, and therefore you see change as a really big opportunity for you. Whereas you may be somebody maybe coming to the later stages of your career who doesn't like change and doesn't want the organiser and all the hassle that comes with having to cope in a different environment. So your own individual history and your own individual perspective will be very important in working this through. And again, the nature for change. Has this change come about because some distant chief executive has mandated it to you, or is it something that you as a team have come up with, and therefore you have ownership of that change? Will greatly affect how you react to it. Okay, well, moving on from the learning cycle, we now need to think about the stages of transition that people go through. The theory by Bridges is particularly good on this, and he helps us understand the emotional change that individuals and organisations need to go through. So to cope with change, one of the most important things is to mark the end. And I suppose the most graphical illustration that we could ever see of this is when the Vikings came to the UK many years ago. They burned their boats. Now the burning of their boats was the indication that they weren't going home, and this was their new world. So Bridges really is taking that theory on. So if you want people to accept the need to change, you need to actually help them understand why you cannot continue the way things are, whether it's external change, internal policy thing, legal change, whatever it is. We need to really mark the end before people will start to think about the future, because to think about the future means they have to accept there is a future that's different to the one they've got. Once you've marked the end, you take people through the neutral zone, and this is where they're not sure what the future is, they're not sure whether they really want to leave the past behind. And this is a dangerous period because the change needs to have momentum to get them through to the next stage. And then we have the new beginning, explaining what the new world's going to be like. That's what visions are all about. So the vision statement is about saying how wonderful the new world's going to be, or what the implications are. So we have this three-stage approach. You mark the end as it was, with people understanding that do nothing is not an option. We then have to guide them along the path to help them buy into this new beginnings. where the organisation's going, where they're going, and adapt to the new. And this is one of the problems if you're in an organisation that's gone through a round of job cuts. Quite often, for people who are leaving the organisation, the ending is very clear, but those that stay behind may not like the look of the future in that organisation. They may have lost friends, this kind of stuff. So that's why organisations that make job cuts go through a round of less efficiency, not just because they've got less people, but because the people that are there are kind of pining for the ones who have gone, and they're not necessarily feeling they've got the best deal out of this. So that's Bridges' stages of transition. Then we've got the concept of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what Maslow looked at was the emotional needs of human beings. And we're going to go through a little pyramid now. So as human beings, if we go back to kind of the Stone Age or in history when we were very basic animals, if you like, the basic thing they needed was food and water to survive. So our physiological needs are the most important because we have to function as creatures. Once we've got a supply of water and supply of food that we can eat, we then start to think about our safety. So if we think about cavemen or ancient civilizations, first of all, they kind of work together to farm and create crops, and then they build fortresses to make them safe from other tribes. So you can see how we look back in history and how Maslow built this understanding. So safety is the next thing that we need. And then we start to kick into our emotional needs. So it's what's described here as love. So having the support of other individuals. So as human beings, we're kind of tribal because we live in groups, and we need those groups to kind of give us what it calls love here, but kind of company could just be another one. And it's interesting that if you've ever been through some emotional crisis in your life, maybe losing your house or going through some sort of breakup of a family, if you go through that, you realize that actually the first thing everybody needs to do is make sure they've got enough money for food, water, and then they need to find accommodation, because these higher needs kind of drop away because you do go back to the basics. Then once we've got our love and we've got people actually appreciating us and recognizing us, it's then about esteem, yeah, recognition for what we're good at, whether you're a farmer growing a crop or you're a lead author of a book, whatever it is, people need to be recognized. Now you need to have the three below them. They don't worry about esteem when they've got no food. You don't worry about esteem when you've got no safety because there's no fence around you. But as you move up it, your needs continue to grow. And then when you get to the top and you've got the esteem and people love you and they recognize you, it's then about your own self-fulfillment, about are you actually meeting what you believe you're capable of. And in some people, we see that going on through their whole lives. Yeah, there's people still pursuing that once they get into their late 70s and 80s, still pursuing self-actualization. So there's that hierarchy, but it's remembering that if you knock one of those layers away, the others above it fall over because you have to go back and fix the gap. So this is the expectancy theory by Helsinki and Buchanan. Quite a simple concept when you think about it. To motivate people to put more effort in and improve their performance, they need to get some rewards for that. Why should they try harder? So what we need to understand, therefore, is the rewards. So rewards can be financial, they can be in terms of accommodation, they can be in terms of job satisfaction, they can be in terms of just working with great people, working in a great team. There's various things that can create those rewards. So, and from that, we then need to think back about the other elements. So effort is the amount of effort they put into the job. So if you're working on a production line, you need to put a certain amount of effort in to keep up with your task in that production line. Okay, and that means your performance is constrained by the speed of the production line. So you're limited in what you can do in terms of performance. However, if you're in jobs with more autonomy, what we're looking at here is where you put in more effort, you can improve your performance and gain your reward. So it's a kind of, in some ways, you look at this and think it's obvious, but from a change perspective and an individual perspective, if we want them to perform higher, we need to convince them to put more effort in. And they'll only put more effort in if there's an expectancy that they're going to get something out of it. And therefore, the rewards come into it as well. So seeing the three areas as independent stages help us falling down into the cracks of thinking just give them more money and they'll perform better, because it just doesn't work that way. And then we've got the theory of the hygiene factors by Herzberg, which is a really interesting concept because he has this thing about satisfiers and dissatisfiers. Now, we could think that paying people more money or giving them more perks, if you like, would get them to work harder. And as such, they should be more productive. But the research by Herzberg found that actually this wasn't true. And it found that what they found is satisfiers were the hygiene factors. So you would be more inclined to work harder and get job satisfaction if you're working in a good team, if you've got a good boss who acknowledges what you're doing. Maybe you work in a nice environment, you may travel, work in a countryside, or you may want to work in the city. There are factors beyond the salary that make you happy in the job. I can kind of talk about when my career was in the BBC, and a lot of BBC employees work for less money, but really loved working for the BBC because it was a kind of UK blue chip brand. You could see the TV every night. You could see the output of what you were doing and how you contributed to that. So these are the satisfiers. On the dissatisfiers is if you're underpaying people, but they're happy, then that's okay up to a point until people start to realize that maybe you're exploiting them by not paying them enough. So pay and conditions can be a dissatisfier, but very rarely do people work harder because you've given them a pay rise. Okay, so that's basis two sides of Herzberg's theory. You've got motivation that actually keeps you happy, and there's dissatisfiers that make you dissatisfied in the job. And understanding the hygiene factors, like you could be if you're working in a tatty office but earning a huge salary, you could still be unhappy with a tatty office. So these are the kind of things to think about, and obviously in the course we'll talk about them in more detail. Let's have a look at McGregor's humanistic approach to motivation. So there's two views of the world. The first view is the X theory, which is people need to be controlled and told what to do. Fundamentally, people are lazy, will do as little as possible, and have no particular interest in the organisation. They're self-centred, and they really only worry about themselves. The other view of the world, which they call Theory Y, is that people themselves are motivated to work for the organisation for their own benefit. So if you play this back to some of the other ones that we've talked about, X theory is really around Herzberg's managing the dissatisfiers. So actually, if you stop them being unhappy, they'll be motivated. Whereas we can apply the Y theory to the satisfiers. Whereas if you give people a chance to be happy and express themselves in a creative way within an organisation, then they will perform and be more productive. So there's these two schools of thought, which is called the Humanistic school. And it really depends how you see people. Now, the assumption, if we look at kind of a factory in a production line, that is kind of looking at the X theory, where people are given tasks to do and they're expected to get on and do them. And that is their role. Whereas in the Y theory, you would maybe give a group of people the job of producing a product and let them do it themselves. So they're quite different perspectives, and it's true to say that in certain industries, different industries, you require different types of people. And they are actually different types of people that behave in this way. It's not everybody that's an X theory that can behave like a Y theory. But the humanistic approach is basically saying we should try to exploit, for want of a better word, the human need for recognition and happiness when they're doing their work. Another interesting theory is Schein's model of transformative change. Now, this seems very similar to a famous Kurt Lewin model, which was around unfreezing, and he related it to a puddle of water where you unfroze it, moved it to a new place, and refreezes it again. So unfreeze, basically the idea is that organizations are stuck doing things the way they do them. And if they need to do things in a different way, you need to unfreeze the views. Now, they're frozen by the processes they operate, the skills and capability of the people, the culture, and therefore we need to encourage it to change. So unfreezing it, the sort of things you would do would be explaining why you can't stay where you are and the benefits of working in a different way. The change is actually implementing those new working practices, the new IT systems, the new structures, and then the refreeze is sticking the organization in the new state. Now, one of the problems that we see a lot in organizations is you can unfreeze them, but there's quite often a lack of clarity about what the state they need to get to refreeze is. And so therefore they become a little bit culturally lost. People get confused, they change jobs, and the organization becomes less efficient. So it's a very interesting model, this. And so we need to think about the rewards, unfreeze, explain why you can't stay where you are, change, actually what are the incentives to get through this, what is it that people need to know, what's the information they need, and when they get to the new state, rewarding them with for behaving in the new way or using the new tools and systems so that the bulk of the organization see that there's benefits in them for doing it. But as with many of these theories, it's the what's in it for me concept that you need to emphasize in communications. Okay, let's have a little look at our last of the theories. It's Myers-Briggs type indicators, or MBTI as it's known. Probably one of the most useful things that I've ever come across in debugging why relationships in a team don't work. So if we start with the concept that all individuals are different, but as a group we can start to understand them if we can bring them together. So Myers-Briggs came up with this model where they saw people in terms of whether they're extrovert or introvert. So what it means is where do you get your energy from? Introverted people, not introverted as in personalities, but they find the energy from within. So they don't need others to support them. They can work on their own. Whereas extrovert people need the energy from the team to keep them going. So introvert people, you can give them a task and they'll just get on with it. Extrovert people probably work better in groups and teams where they're actually working with others. Then we've got the second, which is sensing and intuiting, which is really about how people process information and how they put it in. Are they processing it logically, or are they going with gut feeling, that sort of stuff? So how they process that information. And then there's how they make decisions. So the theorists amongst them will be thinking about it a lot, whereas the pragmatists will be going, what's my gut feeling here? Yeah, maybe I can't get to the details, so what's my gut telling me? And that's how we get to the F's and the T's. And then you've got judging or perceiving, which is how they actually come to a conclusion and cope with it. So it's worth thinking about how the judging, so when people have come to a conclusion, they're quite difficult to shift from that conclusion. With those people that are perceiving, will actually keep the door open to new ideas. And you'll find that people at the tops of organizations are more perceiving than people at the lower end. And also, if you're in certain professions like engineering, there'll tend to be lots of judges in there because they will have the logic and they will have found the answer to their argument. Whereas perceiving people are kind of, they could be quite difficult for judging people to deal with. And I said earlier on that this is one of the most useful things. And I have particularly found this, that if you're mixing J's and P's, it can go, you need to make sure you're in control of that mixing. And if you have a group that's full of P's, then they might very well find it difficult to get to a decision. Whereas if you've got a group full of J's, they'll make that decision far too quickly and they won't be interested in any alternative options. So you would end up with a combination of those. So personally, I'm an ENTP. So kind of I draw my energy a little bit from the people around me. I'm kind of intuitive as I'm going through it. So I'm kind of processing information, joining up lots of dots, things that I've heard, relating it back to knowledge that I might have, thinking. So I'm working quite logically through it. And then at the end, perceiving. I quite often keep the door open to the last minute on what the final decision is. Or you might have lots of options. You'll keep options running to get to the end. Okay, so obviously there's more in the course about that, but a really interesting option, and you can go online and do self-assessments of this if you want. They're not very expensive, but they're very good insight. And if you're in a team, it's worth getting them all to do it because it does help you debug some relationships. And as I've said, judging people and perceiving people together can be a little bit fractious. But once they understand the way the other one's thinking, then it's actually fine and you can cope with it. Okay, so that's the end of this module. Hopefully there's some useful food for thought in there for you. I hope you enjoy the course, and it's time for you to have a coffee and get over all that information.